Chapter 19. Champagne Problems. Très belle, Jean-Paul coos as his camera snaps away. 3 assistants flank him, holding various and sundry lights and pieces of equipment, while a hairdresser, makeup artist, and clothing stylist stand to the side. They appear ready to rush in should they see something on me that doesn't look perfect. This shoot, which is taking place in the penthouse of the Chateau Marmont, a room I know rents for $10,000 a day, is far more exciting and surreal than anything I've ever experienced. But I'm doing a decent job of acting like I'm used to having everything revolve around me, with assistants fetching me Evian, apples, or really anything else I might desire. I'm afraid that if I let on how shocked I am by the sheer amount of money clearly being spent, I'll reveal just how small time I am. The stylist, a well-known one I'd interviewed over the phone several times while I was working at Absolutely Fabulous, had greeted me when I got here with racks of everything from Armani gowns and Gucci blouses to Chloe suits and Missoni dresses. "Daniel said he wanted us to shoot the photos for your next several columns," she said casually. "Since we don't know what's going to be in the columns yet, he said we should choose a bunch of different looks: casual, dressy, sexy, demure, whatever we could think of." I nod and decide not to remind her that we've spoken before. It was, I think, a lifetime ago. She has me try on beautiful skirts, dresses, shirts, and jeans, even lingerie from La Perla, and she seems to know exactly how to play up my assets. I end up feeling like all I've ever needed in order to feel constantly beautiful was a stylist. Jean-Paul comes over to introduce himself, and I immediately find him sexy, even though the stylist has already warned me that he's a dog, pig, and every other animal you can imagine. Figures I'd like him. "Ah, you are truly exquisite," he says, with a strong French accent and a devilish smile. "The photos, they will take themselves." He continues to watch me as the stylist pins the gown I'm wearing so it hoists my cleavage up. And then, once I've been made up and gelled and sprayed and shellacked until I look like the supermodel version of myself, Jean-Paul starts snapping. The entirety of my knowledge about modeling has been culled from America's Next Top Model, but one thing I'm positive of is that I love having my picture taken. According to my mom, I cried nonstop for my first 3 months of life, until a professional photographer showed up to take family photos, and I suddenly gave him the biggest, most toothless grin a person who's only been alive for 90 days possibly could. As I switch my poses around, Jean-Paul mumbles words like magnifique, belle, and très belle. In between shots, Jean-Paul and I smoke while his assistants set up the lights for the next set of pictures, and a stand-in takes the place of where I'll be. Then, when I'm done with my cigarette, the stylist comes and gets me to change. Rather than allowing all of this treatment to bring out my inner diva, I'm the very picture of kindness, asking everyone else how they're doing. I swear, if I were treated like this all the time, I'd be a pleasure to be around 24/7. We're getting ready to do our last set for the day. I'm in an insanely flattering purple, pink, and black striped Missoni gown and tottering around in high-heeled purple Jimmy Choos, when Daniel and John show up. "You look stunning," Daniel says, as he leans in to kiss each of my cheeks. John trails behind him and gives me an awkward salute. Then Daniel turns to Jean-Paul. "Have you done the champagne drinking shot yet?" he asks. I sort of inadvertently flinch at the word champagne as Jean-Paul shakes his head. "Mon Dieu, I almost forgot," he says. Jean-Paul says something to 2 of his lackeys and they leave the room, then come back holding these plastic contraptions that they pieced together to make an enormous 6-foot-tall champagne plexiglass. Daniel shows Jean-Paul how he'd like me to sit in it, as John lets in a room service waiter delivering bottles of Dom Pérignon. And even though I may well be in the middle of the single most validating day of my life so far, I grow concerned enough by what's happening to wander over to Daniel and ask him if I can speak to him for a moment. "Of course. Go ahead," he says, continuing to stand there next to Jean-Paul and his minions. Couldn't he see that what I wanted to say was private? Completely uncomfortable, I force myself to ask, Is it absolutely imperative that we do this champagne thing?" Daniel looks slightly flummoxed. "Oh, do you not like it?" For the first time since we've met, I get a glimpse of the fact that Daniel may not be perfect. He looks, in fact, slightly irritated by my question. Well, I just was wondering, do I have to be holding champagne in the shot? Daniel, now making no effort to hide his annoyance, sighs. Amelia, you're the party girl. We have to convince readers of that not only through your column, but also visually, through pictures. He's suddenly talking to me like I'm 7 and don't understand what the word visually means. I nod. Ridiculously, I feel tears start to well up, but I close my eyes for a second and force them to go away. It seems like it should be simple enough to explain my situation to Daniel, but I just can't seem to. Tell him you're sober, my head says, and then I think, hell no, he'll start asking questions and figure out you're really not this party girl anymore. Instead, I try channeling the confident, egoless diva in the making that I'd been acting like all day. Is there going to be a problem? Daniel asks, quite sternly, just as John wanders over to see what's going on. I take a breath and push all my negative thoughts to the back of my brain. No, not at all. Jean-Paul asks, so you are ready, ma chérie? I nod and allow 2 of the assistants to hoist me into the mammoth champagne glass. I get as comfortable as I can in an enormous piece of plastic and accept the bottle and glass of champagne that the set designer hands me. Daniel and John move to the back of the room, while Jean-Paul starts clicking and muttering his French compliments. But the magic seems to be gone. Before, I'd been feeling natural and happy and pretty, just by smiling or laughing or gazing into the camera and thinking of funny or intense moments. But now, lounging in this life-size champagne glass, I feel forced. I keep thinking, this is what a girl who's playing the part of a party girl should look like. Jean-Paul doesn't seem to notice because he keeps shooting and cooing at me and calling me très belle. I try not to think about the fact that my lips and nose are less than a foot from a glass of champagne. When I got into rehab, I was perfectly willing to admit that I had a problem with coke and sleeping pills, but I still never really bought into this whole idea of being alcoholic. I told Tommy on one of my first days at Pledges that I was willing to consider the fact that alcoholism and drug addiction might be the same thing, but I still wasn't convinced. In fact, in those meetings when people introduced themselves by saying their name and the word alcoholic, I clung steadfastly to what I truly knew about myself, so I replaced the word alcoholic with the word addict. I wasn't the only one. A guy who used to be in Twisted Sister, who'd done the Pledges program the month before me, and I'd heard share in the alumni meetings, was also clinging hard to the word addict. And sitting in the champagne glass, with the scent of Dom Perignon wafting up my nostrils, I become more convinced than ever that my problem has never been with alcohol. The glass is so close that I could easily tip the flute into my mouth and sip. A slew of assistants would surely spring to attention at the opportunity to refill it. But I really have no desire. All these wonderful things in my life now, this new gig, my friendship with Justin, the reconnection with Stephanie, and the potential romance with Adam, not to mention the overall sense of peace that seems to have replaced all those self-absorbed feelings of misery that I'd come to accept as normal, feel related to my having gotten sober. I'm not interested in screwing any of that up, even if it means having to go along with this notion of being an alcoholic without fully believing it. I seem to be shooting okay pictures during the entire time I'm zoning out and thinking of the proximity of the glass to my lips, because Jean-Paul is looking genuinely thrilled and Daniel and John are smiling as they whisper to each other and point at me. And I think, screw what the people at Pledges are going to think if they see this picture of me that's essentially an ode to champagne. I'm wearing a Missoni gown in the Chateau Marmont's penthouse suite, being fawned over by a famous photographer. Why the hell should I care what anyone thinks?